Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy, but America's agricultural landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertisement campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in, from the producers who make your food, to the store where you buy the final product, and everything in between. This is Real Ag. Now, here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
Many of us at one time or another had to deal with different wildlife living on or damaging our property. But what do we do if we want these creatures to leave and stay away? What are the proper measures to take, and who can we contact if we have questions? We'll answer these questions and more on this Animal Pest episode of Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
How can I make my property less vulnerable to wildlife damage?
It really depends on the species of wildlife you're talking about. For example, if you were trying to reduce the damage that would be caused by deer, you would want to modify the habitat. All wildlife problems are solved with the acronym HER. H would stand for habitat modification, E would stand for exclusion, and R would be removal. So almost all wildlife problems can be resolved by one of those techniques. So habitat modification would be take away the things that deer find useful on that particular property. It might be food, it might be cover for hiding.
How do I remove a wild animal or bird from my property?
Well, it really depends on the animal. Sometimes if you're trying to relocate an animal, that would be the removal. They can be removed dead or alive, but if you're going to relocate them, the first thing you need to do is find the location that you're going to move the animal to. Is that habitat suitable so that that animal has a fair chance of surviving once they're moved? And then secondly, do you have permission on the site where you're going to release the animal? Then you come back to what animal it is and select the appropriate capture technique. Usually that's a cage trap.
What does the term taken mean?
Take is a broad category that can include killing, it can include capturing, it can include the attempt to capture. So it's much broader than just killing the animal. Take can include the attempt to kill the animal.
Should I hire a wildlife damage control operator instead of trapping an animal myself?
It depends how comfortable you are with the animals, how good you are at the techniques. There are times when it's best to hire a professional. One case in point might be animals that are in the chimney, and you have to deal with steep roofs and heights, like raccoons in the chimney. Those may be cases where it would be good to hire a professional. If you're using pesticides, which are general use or restricted use pesticides, then you want to make sure that you or the person you hire has the proper certifications to apply such pesticides.
How do I know if a wildlife expert is certified?
Well, ask for the certification, see a copy of their certification. You can also search for that off the Department of Agriculture's website. They have a list of certified applicators that are in Category 1C, which would be agriculture wildlife damage. There's also some regulations that are in place by the Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism. Those would be people that would be permitted by KDWPT to take wildlife outside of the seasons when they're doing damage. They have some special exemptions to that first statute that I mentioned. So because of their special certification, they would be able to take wildlife on a commercial basis for you if they have that permit from the Department of Wildlife and Parks.
How do I dispose of euthanized or dead wildlife?
Well, dead wildlife can be disposed of by deep burying or in household trash if they're double bagged. Well, I'm not sure it has to be double bagged, so Wildlife can be disposed of by deep burying, which would be the technique that I would recommend.
What species of wildlife do we see interfering with farming and production?
Probably the most numerous one on number of complaints and far as the most economic loss would be from deer. And that's typically with consumption and damage of cultivated row crops. Primarily corn, but sometimes it's hay in the winter. They may get on hay piles.
Are prairie dogs a protected species?
Well, all wildlife has some protection, but prairie dogs are listed in a category that they can be taken. Like most species in Kansas, they can be taken when in or near buildings or destroying property. So yes, prairie dogs would be a protected species, but under the right situations, they can be taken.
Do I need a permit to remove certain animals from my property?
Again, we think back to that statute that says, are you the landowner or the legal occupant of the property? Now, if you meet those criteria that I mentioned, you would not need additional permission. Sometimes you don't need additional permission if it's during the hunting or fur harvesting season, because you would already have that appropriate license. But if it's outside of those normal seasons of take, then you would need to be allowed under that exemption provided by statute or have the wildlife nuisance operator permit.
Can you explain rodent damage and conservation tillage?
Well, that's a problem that seems to be on the increase. As people go to leaving more residue on the soil surface, it creates excellent habitat for rodents. So remember, part of the method to control any wildlife problem was habitat modification. What producers are doing by going to no-till or conservation till is actually creating additional opportunities for those rodents to reproduce and to thrive. So you're creating habitat that benefits them, so then you have to take some measures to remove that habitat, which may be at cross purposes with your agricultural purposes. So in most cases, you're going to have to go with another technique since it's going to be very difficult to exclude small rodents from a crop field. You have to go with removal. That's further complicated by there's not very many toxicants available for croplands. So you have very limited options to control rodent damage in conservation till fields.
Are there products to avoid when removing pests?
There are some cautions to be using toxicants. Remember, those are designed to kill animals. There's no perfect ones out there. They all have some impacts either on target or non-target species that may consume the product inadvertently.
Do we see diseases moving across Kansas that are affecting different species of animals?
All wildlife is susceptible to diseases, and we have disease outbreaks that are ongoing. Usually those are diseases that have been going for a long period of time. The population responds. Sometimes it shrinks. Sometimes we have a good recovery. One of the new ones would be chronic wasting disease for deer populations. Eventually, that's probably going to reduce deer numbers. It's a disease that takes a long time, so it's not something that's going to dramatically decrease the population in any one year, but eventually those animals are going to succumb to chronic wasting disease.
Are we seeing farming practices and producers affecting more wildlife?
There are probably some things that are done that decreased wildlife populations because of direct agriculture production. Many things, when you're converting permanent native grasses to a crop field, you've changed the habitat. So you're back into modifying the habitat, which is what controls the wildlife populations. So if you're making some adjustment in your cropping practices that modifies the habitat by removing cover or reducing food or reducing water, then yes, you're probably impacting wildlife. Sometimes it's in a positive manner, but most times it's in a negative manner.
Are there instances where we would not be able to remove or take an animal from our property?
There are certain situations when you would not be able to remove wildlife when found damaging your property. Those would be if it's a federally protected species, because state law can't supersede federal law. That would include threatened and endangered species, or species that are considered migratory birds by international treaty or federal law. So those would be some situations. You must also have made reasonable attempts, and that's somewhat of a gray area. What is a reasonable attempt at controlling the damage before you take the animal? That differs in each individual situation.
When is it appropriate to notify an agency that an animal on your property and your attempt to remove it?
Well, I think we all try to be good stewards and good citizens. And there are some things that some people can keep hidden, but there are other things that come out eventually. One of the requirements of the statute that we've talked about that allows people to take wildlife, there's been a couple of Supreme Court cases, state Supreme Court cases, that tried to further define what reasonable was. And one of them is it must include notifying the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks and Tourism when it pertains to big game. So just because you have big game animals on your property that are causing damage doesn't mean that you can go out and immediately start taking them. Have you made reasonable attempts, and have those attempts included contact with state officials?
What is the Milford Nature Center?
The Nature Center is a visitor center that we focus in on Kansas plants and animals and try to help people understand our native Kansas wildlife. We've got, but another side of things is we do a lot of wildlife rehab here. We're one of the few wildlife rehab facilities in the state of Kansas. We cover a good 8 to 10 counties where we are located right here, and even all over the state in some cases. So,
how do these animals come to the center?
well, most of them the finder needs to bring to us. We don't have the resources to go and get stuff when people find it. On occasion, if it's something big like an eagle or something that could potentially be dangerous, yeah, we will make an effort to go, but we ask the finder to bring it to us. And sometimes we get them from other rehab facilities across the state that have gotten a particular case in and they don't know what to do, or they don't have the means to take care of it, and then we'll take it from them as well. So.
Are these animals protected?
All birds, migratory birds are protected in the United States. It's called from the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So all the raptors, all the songbirds, anything unless it can be hunted, then it's protected under this Migratory Bird Treaty Act. The exceptions are pigeons, starlings, and house sparrows. They don't fall under any protection because they're not supposed to be here. They're not native birds, and they were brought here by humans and have spread all over. But it means they're protected, and it means that you can't have them, you can't take them home and raise them, and because the chances, the reason being, they're pretty specialized. You're going to need a very special diet for certain birds. You're going to need a very special facility to maintain them. And most people don't have that knowledge or expertise, and so that's where the wildlife rehab comes in. That's where you get the certification. Because in the state of Kansas, you have to be a certified wildlife rehabber. So even if you have the desire to do it, and you have the property or whatever, and you want to do it, come talk to me, because I'll tell you how you can get involved. In fact, we're going to be offering a class here in September 1st and 2nd on basic wildlife rehab, and it will give you the certification you need. But so yeah, these birds are protected, and you need to have, in order to handle them, you have like 48 hours to turn them over to a rehabilitation facility.
Can anybody become a wildlife rehabilitator or build a rehabilitation center?
If with the proper training and the proper facilities, you build the cages, you build the, they all have to be inspected, and it's an annual inspection, but it can be done if you have the desire. But you need to learn first and you need to get the knowledge and do some apprenticing before you become a rehabber on your own.
What other animals are protected?
Birds have federal protection, but mammals are generally jurisdiction of the state, so the rules vary from state to state on what can be done, but they're all still protected in the sense that you can't, have them as pets or because you can't obtain them from the wild kind of thing.
What is the most misunderstood thing you find about people who bring you animals?
Well, I think the thing that people have to be able to live with wildlife, and just because an animal's in your yard doesn't make it bad or doesn't make it unusual. If you see a skunk walk through your yard or you see a possum, you know, you have to, bobcats, for example. There's a lot of bobcats that are urban. They live inside city limits. Foxes live inside city limits, and people get all excited when they see one. They don't think it's supposed to be there, and they are there. So just being more aware of what is in your area, that it is natural to have these things, and to be willing to live with them and to make some changes. You might have to make a few changes if you end up with a problem. Maybe you can't feed your cat outside. You know, maybe you can't have your dog loose in the yard while the baby rabbits are there. You might have to make changes for a short period, but trust me, it won't be forever. I mean, you know, those animals grow up and move on, and you don't have that problem anymore. So being willing to work with us and people who, with advice on how you can deal with these problems and actually still have the beauty of the wildlife in your yard. I mean, to me, it's a bonus. Anytime I see something in my yard, I'm like, yeah, that's cool.
Is it okay for me to relocate an animal on my property?
Generally, that's not going to be successful. The research is out there. It's been done over the last 20, 30, 40 years. We know, really, we have a lot of good information to back it up, that most animals that are relocated do not survive well. The thing you have to keep in mind is when you relocate an animal, you're putting it in an area there probably already is an animal there. Say it's a raccoon. If it's a good place for a raccoon to be, there's already a raccoon there. So you're putting a new raccoon in, doesn't know the area, doesn't know where the food is, doesn't know where the shelter is, it already has to compete with this other animal. They don't do well. When they're in your area, that's their home, and they need to be encouraged to move on instead of relocating them. They'll move on their own. They've got other places they can go. You just need to help them move on. Don't trap them and take them someplace else. Same with people who think they're helping by putting box turtles. If a box turtle's crossing the road, just put it on the other side of the road. Don't put it in your car and take it 5 miles away, because a box turtle lives his entire life in 1 square mile, and he can grow up to be 80 years old. So you're not helping it by putting it in a new place. You've just taken it out of its whole life, and the better way to deal with it is to just help it across the road and not take it 5 miles down the road.
Do you supply animal traps to people?
Absolutely not. No. I mean, we don't. If somebody will. It depends. It's a case-by-case basis. If somebody calls us and talks to us about what's going on, we'll try to do what we can. But no, we don't have traps. We have a couple of traps that we might loan, but I don't have a lot.
Can you tell us how the center is funded?
We're a facility of the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism. So our funding base is from the hunting and fishing, sale of hunting and fishing licenses, and the federal excise tax, like the Pittman Robertson and Dingle Johnson money that comes to each state gets. So that's, we're not tax-based at all. So we don't get any state tax dollars at all. So it's just from the sale of hunting and fishing licenses. Parks, of course, get some revenue from their park entrance fees and things like that, but it's mostly it's sportsman funded. It's from the sale of hunting and fishing licenses and that Pittman Robertson and Dingle Johnson money.
Are donations accepted?
Absolutely, yes. We do take donations, especially for some of the things. We have a friends group. We have a friends group that helps us out with helping to raise money and does some events for us. And we also just simply take donations here at the Nature Center, especially to help with the rehab side of things.
What are the most common problems that you get called about?
Well, I think the thing that we probably get the most calls, and our mantra is leave it alone, are the baby bunnies, because cottontail rabbits are all over, and they nest in yards that have dogs. They nest in seemingly weird places, and people are constantly finding them. And rabbits, believe it or not, are actually pretty hard to rehab. It's not that they're hard to feed, it's that rabbits get certain gut bacteria from their mother. It's called a cecotroph. And if they don't get that, they don't have the right bacteria to digest grass, and so they can't successfully eat grass. And what's a rabbit that can't eat grass? I mean, so they're harder to do than you think. So it's much more important for mom to raise those baby bunnies than it is for us, because we have a harder time coming up with cecotrophs, which is why we keep that rabbit in the back.
What if someone finds a nest of baby bunnies?
Here's the deal. Mama rabbits come to their nest twice in a 24-hour period, and they stay less than 2 minutes each time. So the chance of you actually finding mom at the nest feeding her babies are pretty slim. And they're doing this at dawn and dusk. But those babies are going to go all day without mom being there. She's in the yard, she's somewhere nearby, but she's not right there at her nest. And so you can tell if those babies' bellies are nice and round and full, mom's been there. And if she doesn't come back, if something does happen to mom and she does get hit by a car or something like that, those babies after a day or so will start leaving the nest, and they'll go in all different directions. So you have this pattern of baby bunnies crawling out from all over in a kind of a pattern that, each direction. That's a good sign that mom's gone, and they're kind of skinny looking. But if they're content, if they're in the nest, their eyes, their bellies are full, then they're fine, that mom came. But you can do a couple of things. You can put like string over the nest, a couple of pieces of string, because in theory, if mom visits the nest, she'll move the string. You can also put flour around. You can see if there's little footprints in the flour. So there's some things you can do to if you're worried, to check to make sure mom's coming back. But in general, you just need to, cover them up during the day if a dog or something like that is a problem, and then uncover them at night so mom can get to her babies. And it works out. We actually had a daycare that had a nest of baby bunnies underneath the slide, where you come off of the slide. Bad place to have a baby rabbit. So what they did though is every day they put the babies in a box, took them inside, kept them inside when the daycare kids were there. When the daycare kids went home, they put the baby bunnies back out. Did just fine. So there are ways you can live with them, and you can live with wildlife, and it's possible. But it takes a little effort. You gotta be willing to help and change your ways just a bit. Be inconvenienced for just a little while. And the rewards are big, I say, because you feel good about helping and seeing that nest of baby birds successfully fledge, or seeing those rabbits go on and be rabbits.
Who do you get in contact with if you have questions about animals on your property?
We have 2 numbers here at the Nature Center. We have the 785-238-5323, and that's our main building, and then 785-238-3108 is our actual rehab room. So hopefully you can get somebody from either one of those numbers. And then if you listen to the answering machine, there's an after-hours number, which is my cell phone, my personal cell phone number, that I'll try to answer people's questions in the evenings and on weekends if we're not here. So that usually works pretty well. And there are some websites. We're on some websites. My number comes up a lot. I have gotten calls from Maine to Oregon to New Mexico to Georgia, people who found my number on the internet and called. So my very first question anymore is, are you calling me? Are you anywhere close to Milford? Because with the military base so close, with Fort Riley here, people's numbers don't have 785 area codes. They're from all over. And so I never know if they're calling me from Fort Riley or if they're calling me from someplace else. And they'll call me and they'll say, well, I'm calling you from Minnesota. And I'm like, well, here's the deal. Let me tell you how you get a hold of somebody in Minnesota, So I spend a lot of my time connecting people to the right resources, And even when they call from here in Kansas, we're pretty far away from some places, and if I can get you to a closer place, I'll try to help you out, because we're certainly not the only facility, and there are places that you can go that might be closer.
Who do I contact for technical advice about nuisance wildlife in Kansas?
Really, if you look at there's a list of certified rehabilitators that's maintained by Wildlife and Parks, and it's, boy, if there's 15 on there, I'd be surprised. So, and some of them are really small or very specialized. They only take in mammals, for example. They don't have the federal permits to do birds, or, so some of them are very restricted. There's a couple of people in Wichita, but they only do raptors. That's it, just birds of prey. They won't do songbirds or ducks or, any other birds. So it's pretty limited on some of them.
So remember, there are many ways to take or remove an animal from your property, but it is expected that we try to be good stewards of this land and all the creatures that inhabit it. If you want to check out this episode of Real Ag, go to smokyhillstv.org. For the Real Ag crew, I'm Kyle Bauer, and this has been Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.